Welcome to the Australia Institute's Economics Academy. I'm Richard Dennis, Chief Economist at the Australia Institute.
And I'm Matt Grudnoff, the Senior Economist at the Australia Institute.
In this episode, we'll be talking about opportunity cost and thinking at the margin. In our first episode, we talked about what economics is. It's the science of the efficient allocation of scarce resources. And what we're going to do in this episode is talk about the economist's favourite tool, the production possibility frontier curve, or the PPF to its friends. We're going to talk about how economists use the production possibility frontier to understand opportunity cost, and we're going to distinguish between the difference between marginal cost and average cost, and then we're going to come to that all-time favourite, cost-benefit analysis. So
Exciting.
Matt, while I'm drawing up a PPF, what is a production possibility frontier?
Well, a production possibility frontier is basically a great way of showing how opportunity cost works. And opportunity cost is one of those really important parts of economics where once you understand it, it actually changes how you think about things, and it's actually a good detector of nonsense.
Economics is crap detection.
It is, it is. It can be. It can also be crap creation, but we'll get into that a bit later.
All right. All right, so I've got a production possibility frontier curve here. Production, Matt, what's that mean?
Well, production is basically making stuff, however you make it, whether it's in a big factory making tables or whether it's cutting people's hair in a hair salon.
Oh, why'd you have to talk about hair?
Well, some of us have some and some of us don't, Richard.
Yeah, you got a little bit too much there.
A bit too much?
All right, so production means making stuff. Possibilities, what do we mean by possibilities?
Well, possibilities is all the options you could have in how you make stuff, or what you make. So you might want to make more haircuts because you've got lovely hair, or you might want to produce tables because you don't have lovely.
Right, and frontier, what do we mean by frontier?
Well, frontier, you know, a bit like the Wild West, it's the outer limit. It's the most that you can do. You can't go beyond the frontier.
So we can't boldly go beyond the frontier.
No, space is the frontier.
All right, so what we've got here is a little bit of algebra which we're going to ignore, but we've got here X and Y. What a production possibility frontier curve, or options for making stuff limit curve is, allows you to look at any two things, X and Y, and see what happens when you make more X to the amount of Y you make. But everybody hates algebra except economists. So instead of X and Y, what will we use? Matt, what's the classic economics textbook?
Well, usually in economics textbooks, if you open up the dusty old tomes, we have guns and we have butter.
Because they're the big choices in life.
They are.
Should we make more guns, or shall we churn some more butter?
That is what keeps policymakers awake at night.
So back in the olden days when we invented economics, we were thinking about the big issues like guns and butter, but actually let's do guns and butter before we modernise it. So what we're going to do with our production possibility frontier curve is ask a couple of hypothetical questions. If we put all of the resources available in a country, all of the resources available.
So what do you mean by resources?
I mean people and their time. I mean land, I mean iron, I mean water, I mean everything we can think of.
The factories.
Everything. We're just going to make guns. A production possibility frontier curve says that's if you put all of a society's resources in to guns, you could make that many guns, and by definition, if you put all of your resources into making guns, how much butter would you make, Matt?
None.
None.
Because you've got all your resources in guns, you've got none left to make butter.
And if we put all of our resources into making butter, and isn't this a choice we've all thought about from time to time? When we put all of our resources into making butter, how many guns can we make, Matt?
0.
Right.
We've got no resources left to make guns.
So our making stuff options line, aka the production possibility frontier, says, well, that's a bit silly. No one's only going to make guns and no one's only going to make butter. We could have all sorts of options about how, as a society, hey, get off my whiteboard, how, as a society, we might allocate our scarce resources. But what's important here is that every time we allocate some more resources into making butter, we have to make less guns. That's all opportunity cost is. That's all a production possibility frontier curve is, and in some sense this is really what economics is all about.
So remember opportunity cost, all right? If you do one thing, then you have to give up something else. So in this particular case, if we want to make more butter, we have to give up some guns. Or if we want to make more guns, we have to give up butter.
Now, economists aren't completely stupid. We do know that people can make more than two things at a time. But because we can really only do 2 dimensions on a blackboard, and because you hate algebra, we're sticking with the thought experiment of 2 products. X and Y's, guns and butters, or, well, anything you want. Televisions versus holidays. But Matt, what's a nice topical example that we could put up here?
Well, in the pandemic that we're currently in, how about lives saved and Trump rallies?
Right. Lives saved from a highly infectious disease.
Yep.
And large, pointless political gatherings. And of course, the whole point of COVID-19 is that it spreads easily. That's why Matt and I are standing so far apart, that and he's got good hair. So because it's a highly infectious disease, the more big gatherings we have, the more people get the disease. And the more people who get the disease, the more people die. So if, and it's a big if, because remember economics doesn't tell us what we should do, it just tells us what we could do. So if you wanted to save a lot of lives, if you wanted to efficiently allocate scarce resources and your goal was to save a lot of lives, then the optimal number of large avoidable gatherings would be 0. And that would maximise the amount of lives saved. But the more gatherings you want to allow, the more people are going to get the disease. And if you maximise the number of gatherings, we could force everybody to go out and give each other a hug if we really wanted to. If we did that, then that will obviously result in the minimum number of lives saved. So we have to take very seriously, as citizens, as economists, these trade-offs. We have to allocate scarce resources in ways that have very real consequences. We can turn this into anything we want. We can have wood chips and native forests. The one thing that economists are telling you is the old truism that there's no such thing as a free lunch. When we use resources to produce one thing, we give up the opportunity to produce something else. And once you know that, as Matt said at the beginning, economics is a very powerful BS detector. Because if someone's talking about doing something as if it has no consequences for something else, then they're almost certainly, I say almost certainly ignoring what economics has got. Matt, are there any examples where there aren't trade-offs?
There is always an opportunity cost. A really important point is that opportunity cost isn't about dollars necessarily. So a good example might be iron ore and priceless Aboriginal cave art, right? Now, Rio Tinto made a decision to blow up some caves, okay? And that came at the price of priceless art. Now, at the time, they thought that the iron ore, clearly, underneath those caves was worth more to them than the priceless caves. That is, the best option was to blow them up. Since then, a number of them have been sacked for making that decision, so clearly other people thought that the priceless rock art was more valuable than the iron ore. But you'll note that the iron ore could be valued in dollars, the priceless rock art couldn't be. So it doesn't always have to have dollars in order to be something that we put into opportunity cost or
That's
a PPF.
Right. And we'll come to that soon, because one of the most commonly used economic tools is what's called the cost-benefit analysis. And a cost-benefit analysis can be used to answer questions like Matt just said. Should we get some more iron ore at the cost of blowing up possibly the world's oldest continuously habited site? Should we have more iron ore or more indigenous culture? Well, you can actually ask economists that question. We're willing to have a crack. we can do what we call a cost-benefit analysis. But as we said in the first episode, different people are going to come up with different ideas about what the goal is, what efficient is, and what important is. So the people who decided they wanted more iron ore and less Indigenous art, they got sacked. The fact that someone did a cost-benefit analysis doesn't mean they got it right, which again shows how subjective and how important it is to scrutinise economic analysis. So we as a society have made the rules for rulemaking, and sometimes we use these economic costs and benefits, and sometimes we just intervene and do what we think is right and fair. When someone's lost at sea, we just send very expensive planes out to look for them. And you'll hear politicians say meaningless things like, no resources will be spared. Yeah, they will. A lot of resources will be deployed, but lots of resources will also be spared. If I'm flying from Sydney to Melbourne and someone's lost at sea, my plane is not diverted to fly around and see if we can find the person lost at sea. If we wanted to put all of our effort into finding someone, that means we'd put none of our effort into anything else. So we're always allocating scarce resources, and the production possibility frontier curve simply helps us understand those trade-offs, and most importantly, helps everybody understand that there's always some form of trade-off when we're talking about real resources. Now, let's talk about the difference between marginal cost and average cost. This is a very weird concept, but it's a very important concept, and when we start to apply our production possibility frontier, when we start to apply this to our cost-benefit analysis, we need to also have this idea of the marginal cost and marginal benefit in our heads. So Matt, what's marginal mean?
Well, marginal is a thing that's difficult to wrap your head around, but a bit like opportunity cost, once you actually understand it, it will actually change the way you look at stuff. So marginal...
Change your world.
So marginal is about the change, or if we're talking about marginal cost, the cost of the next item. So a lot of people understand what the average cost is. If I produce 100 units, and I take the cost of all that and divide it by 100, then that gives me the average cost per unit. But the average cost per unit and the marginal cost of the next unit might be different.
So let's take an example of marginal cost. As Matt said, marginal cost means the cost of doing one extra thing. So remember in the olden days, and maybe you don't, there were margins on the edge of a piece of paper, right? So you have a margin down the edge of a piece of paper. A margin just means the edge. So the marginal cost or the marginal benefit or the marginal anything is, well, what happens if we just went a little bit further? What happens if we just went a little bit further? So when we talk about the cost of making something, so I'm going to make a cake at home. All right, I buy some flour, I buy some sugar, I buy some eggs, I buy some butter, I buy some vanilla because it's a very nice flavour.
The most boring flavour, but still nice.
All right, and I combine all these things to make a cake. While so I'm sitting there and I've got all my ingredients and I'm making my cake. The cost of making my cake is the cost of all of the resources. The cost of the flour, the cost of the eggs, the cost of the energy to turn my oven on, and the cost of my time. So I'm making a cake, and let's say it costs me $10 worth of ingredients and $10 worth of my time and $1 worth of electricity. So the marginal cost of making my first cake is, oh, I didn't do the math.
10 plus 10 plus 1, 21.
$21, all right? And then Matt rings up and says, Richard, I hear vanilla is the nicest flavour in the world and that you're making vanilla cake today. Could you please make me one? I say, yes, Matt, because vanilla is the nicest flavour in the world. I will make you a vanilla cake. The marginal cost of me making the second cake is a lot lower than the first. I'm going to need just as much flour, I'm going to need just as many eggs, I'm going to need just as much tasty vanilla to make the second cake. So the raw materials, the ingredient cost per cake is probably going to be about the same, but I've already turned the oven on and I'm already mixing it all up. So it takes me far less time to make the second cake than it does the first. So when we talk about the marginal cost of doing something, we're talking about the cost of doing one more of something. And we can talk about marginal lots of things. Marginal benefit means simply what's the extra benefit you'd get from doing one more of things. So in economics, we distinguish between the fixed costs the fixed cost of sort of building a factory or the fixed cost of setting up your cake making at home. And once you've incurred those fixed costs, economists call them sunk. They're gone. Forget about it. You've already spent that money. Once you've built the factory, once I've already set up to make a cake, when someone says, would you like to make one more of them, that's the marginal cost. That's the decision that you can still focus on. It's the thing, well, can I be bothered doing one more of those things? So when we're trying to efficiently allocate scarce resources, we always have to have our eye on what are the marginal costs of continuing to do something, and then we need to compare those to the marginal benefit of doing that thing. So imagine that you were going to a buffet, $30, all you can eat.
You want to eat a lot because you've paid $30.
You want to get your money's worth.
Get your money's worth.
So you pay your $30, that's a fixed cost. The minute you pay your $30, you've paid $30. You can never get the $30 back, it's gone. The only thing that's in your control is how much you eat. Once you pay your $30 for all you can eat, the marginal cost of a plate of food is zero. So because you've already paid the cost to get in, fixed cost, $30, the marginal cost of the plate of going back to the buffet is zero. So some people, I don't know about you, Matt, some people eat a lot of plates. They go out for their entree plate, come back. They go out
for second entree.
Second entree, couldn't fit it all in the first time. Now we're moving on to mains. We haven't even got to the soft serve ice cream yet.
You get a sneaky ice cream in halfway through the mains, then you go back.
And think about this. I know you wouldn't do this, but other people do this. When they've paid $30 or $50 or whatever for a buffet, they end up eating far more food than they would usually consume. I'm not talking about you, I'm talking about everybody else in the world. And they feel sick at the end of it. Because what an economist would say is, once you've paid the $30, once you've paid for the food, that's a fixed cost, a sunk cost, it's gone. Just think about what are the marginal costs of a plate of food, zero, and the marginal benefit is how you feel after you ate. And an economist would urge you to think like that and think of all the things on the buffet, what thing will give me the most joy, and I'll eat the most joyful thing, and I'll leave here happy, thinking I paid $30, I chose the most joyful food available. How good is life? Economists always leave buffets happy. Humans leave buffets sick and bloated with their buttons unpopped because they look at the food and they think, even though eating it will make me feel sick, I need to get a bargain.
I've already paid the $30.
I've paid the $30.
I've got to get my money's worth.
And if I need to leave feeling sick, so be it. Because getting my money's worth is the most important thing. And that's people not thinking about marginal cost and marginal benefit. If the extra plate of food is going to make you sick, don't eat it. But a lot of people can't, they think about the average cost of the kilos of food they bought. And they think, well, I paid $30 for the buffet.
I got to get $30 worth.
Well, if I get 5 kilos of food, that's only $6 per kilo. And prawns cost $20 a kilo. So I'd be mad not to eat lots of prawns. So focusing on the average cost and focusing on the average price per plate leads people often, not you, but everyone else, to go to the buffet and keep eating, even when the marginal benefit has gone negative. So the minute you start to feel full, here's a tip, stop eating. Or if you really want the ice cream, don't eat the spring rolls.
Or start with dessert.
Or start with dessert. But you're not getting a bargain if you're making yourself feel sick. But it feels like a bargain when you confuse the average price per kilo of food you ate versus the marginal cost of an extra plate, zero, and the marginal benefit of the plate. If the marginal benefit is positive, eat the food. If the marginal benefit is negative, put the plate down. Back away from the buffet, Matt. You're an economist. You know this. So understanding the difference between marginal cost and marginal benefit is really important when it comes to all sorts of economic decisions, because the marginal cost of all sorts of things changes. So when you pay for the buffet, the marginal cost per plate is zero. But for a lot of things, the more you buy, the cheaper they get, or the more you buy, the dearer it gets. If you're consuming lots of data at home, at some point they'll start charging you more for it, or they'll slow down your capacity to get it. Or for something like electricity, you might find that the marginal cost of using electricity is different in your house depending on the time of day.
So you're talking about off-peak rates and peak rates?
Yeah, so a lot of people, for example, will have an electricity tariff, and if this is time of day, and this is the price, you might have an electricity tariff that goes up at, between 3 and 8 o'clock at night, for example. So imagine you've been working from home all day and you think, oh, I'm going to put the oven on now. How much will that cost? Well, depending on the time of day, the price can be significantly different. But if you ask yourself a question like, what's the average price of electricity? You would miss the fact that the marginal cost of electricity is quite different at 5 o'clock.
So this is the average price of electricity?
Yeah. So if I just think about what's electricity cost over the course of a day, I miss the fact that the marginal cost of using electricity at 5 in the afternoon might be different from using it at 2 in the afternoon. So when we think about the average price of food at a buffet, or we think about the average price of electricity, we're not really thinking about the opportunity costs. We're not thinking like economists. We're not thinking at the margin. And when you think about the marginal benefit of turning your oven on at 5 o'clock, well, it might be a good idea to turn it on at 5 o'clock because there was no one home to cook dinner for at 3 o'clock. Or turning the air conditioner on at 5 o'clock because that's when it's hot and you were home might make perfect sense. The marginal benefit of using electricity at 5 in the afternoon is different from the marginal benefit of using it at 3. But what economists encourage people to do when they're thinking about opportunity costs, when we're saying make efficient decisions, we're saying don't think about averages, don't think about the average price per plate at the buffet, always try and think at the margin. If I turn the oven on now, how much will it cost? If I turn the oven on now, what are the benefits to me? So if you can cook your dinner earlier in the day, it's cheaper. If you can do your laundry earlier in the day, it's cheaper. But if you're not at home when it's cheap, well, it's better to cook dinner and wash your clothes than not. But talking about things like the average price of electricity doesn't help. Talking about the average price of food at a buffet doesn't help. Talking about average download speeds doesn't help. What you want to know is if I try to download a movie now, how fast will it be? The human brain loves to think about averages, but for economists, trying to get people to think about opportunity cost, we always want people to think at the margin.
So Richard, what's cost-benefit analysis?
Okay, cost-benefit analysis is simply an attempt by economists to help people make decisions. Cost-benefit analysis says, let's get all the costs that we're interested in and all of the benefits that we're interested in and compare them in a way that helps us decide whether doing something is a good idea or not. Now, cost-benefit analysis can be a very powerful tool because it allows us to bring in all sorts of different information about all sorts of different things and put it in one place and decide whether something's a good idea or not. But cost-benefit analysis can also be incredibly dangerous precisely for the same reason, because we're bringing in all sorts of different costs and all sorts of different benefits and putting them in one place and trying to compare them, when some of the costs and some of the benefits might be very difficult, if not impossible, to compare.
So where was cost-benefit analysis used really well?
Look, cost-benefit analysis is used by businesses all the time when they're, for example, deciding whether or not to add an exciting new colour to their pen range, All right, so if you owned a pen factory and you were in the pen selling business and someone came in and said, what's with red, black, green and yellow? Isn't it time we came up with purple?
Yep.
Or vanilla?
Vanilla.
For example, what are the costs to the company of doing that? How much will it cost to research the new ink? How much will it cost to change the production line to make it possible? Will we need to get new boxes designed to put them in? Whatever.
Is it just cost though?
No, and then we've got to think, well, what are the benefits of doing this? What are the benefits of adding another, exciting colour to the range? And the benefit might be we can sell more pens, or the benefit might be we're the only people selling the exciting new colour and we can sell it at a premium price, or our pen might be so exciting that it'll make people think about our brand entirely new and we'll be able to sell all of our boring old black pens at a higher price because we're the people who invented the highlighter pen or the...
So if the benefits were larger than the cost, does that mean it's definitely a good idea?
No, but if the benefits are lower than the costs, it does mean it's a bad idea. We then have to, if we decide the benefits look like they're higher than the costs, we then need to evaluate, well, what are the risks of doing this? How certain are the benefits? Is it possible the costs will blow out? So cost-benefit analysis, again, it's just a way to bring together a whole bunch of different costs and a whole bunch of different benefits to create a big picture. And when companies do it for something like pens, it's probably the best tool available for them. But as a society, we increasingly employ economists not to help companies decide how many coloured pens is too many, or should they introduce an exciting new flavour of yogurt, or all the big choices that capitalism answers for us. Increasingly, we ask economists things like, is it worth tackling climate change? Or should we bother trying to protect people from COVID-19?
So why is cost-benefit analysis not as effective at, say, tackling climate change?
Well, if I own the pen factory, if I own 100% of the shares in the pen factory, I own 100% of the profits that come from the decisions that I make. So I've got a really strong interest in doing a very good job of defining the costs and a very good job of defining the benefits. Because if I get the pen decision wrong, it's me who wears the costs. If I'm too optimistic about things, I keep introducing new colours that no one buys and I lose money. If I'm too cautious about things, I never change my product, and over time my competitors win.
We miss out on opportunities.
Exactly. So for me, in my private company, making a private decision about what to do, it's in my interests to do a really good job of cost-benefit analysis. But as a society, when companies commission a cost-benefit analysis to show that the company should be allowed to build a new mine, or the company should be allowed to blow up some rock art to get some iron ore, it's in the company's interests to do a bad job of the cost-benefit analysis. Because if I can commission a cost-benefit analysis from a dodgy economist like Matt, then all I have to do is get Matt to make sure he focuses on all the benefits of building the mine and maybe not look so hard when looking for the costs. So it's very hard for any economist to put a dollar value on the cost of the black-throated finch from going extinct. It's very hard for an economist to put their hand on their heart and say, this rock art is worth X million dollars.
So does everything in a cost-benefit analysis have to be in dollar form, and why? If it is, why?
Usually, yes. It's up to us as a society. We could just ask someone to write a list. Pros and cons is really all a cost-benefit analysis is. But what we typically do in economics is we try and put dollar values on all the costs and dollar values on all the benefits, and that allows us to literally add them up and kind of get the answer at the bottom. And that precision in cost-benefit analysis is the appeal for a lot of people. Politicians like it, business people like it because someone told them what the answer is. But as citizens, we need to know that there's a whole bunch of subjective and arbitrary decisions about how to put a dollar value on human life. how to put a dollar value on fresh air, how to put a dollar value on biodiversity, how to put a dollar value on peace and quiet. If someone's going to build a freeway next to your house, if someone's going to build a coal mine next to your house, fresh air and peace and quiet are probably going to be quite valuable to you. But as an economist, if we say, oh, it's hard to measure fresh air, the value of fresh air, I think I might just leave that off the list, then my so-called cost-benefit analysis can wind up being quite incomplete, and, as luck would have it, the person that paid me benefits the worst job I do of doing the cost-benefit analysis.
So thinking about climate change then, so is it a problem that the costs of tackling, some of the costs of tackling climate change are now, but the benefits might be way off in the future?
Absolutely. So there's all sorts of problems when we try and do a cost-benefit analysis for climate change. Like, how do we put a dollar value on a stable climate? How do we put a dollar value on the risk of rising sea levels? And in addition to all the social and environmental costs that it's hard to measure, the time dimension is really important as well. Because if there's profit to be made today from building a new coal mine, and there's costs associated to your kids in 50 years' time, economists have this trick. We call it discounting, and there's a real hint in the name. We discount things that happen in the future. We think that things that happen in the future are less important, are literally less valuable than things that happen today. So when we do something like a cost-benefit analysis for climate change, if I make profit today and you incur costs in 50 years' time, or your kids incur costs in 50 years' time, we discount those future costs.
So Richard, are you saying that your life is worth more than your great-grandchild's life?
Are you asking me as an economist?
As an economist doing a cost-benefit analysis.
My life is worth heaps more than my grandkids. My grandkids' life is worth 1/10 of my life under most of the economic analyses that people have ever seen.
So why would economists ever introduce a discount rate to begin with?
Well, because for some decisions, like making pens, it's a really good idea. If I'm going to spend money today, $1 million to upgrade my pen factory, and in 10 years' time I'll be selling some extra pens, well, I got to spend $1 million today to make money in the future. Well, I can make money in the future by putting my $1 million in the bank. I can just put my $1 million in the bank and I can earn a couple of % interest for doing nothing.
So the discount rate is a bit like an opportunity cost. I could actually take this money and I could earn it, use it in a different way. So because I'm not getting the benefit of the future, I have to discount that benefit to account for that opportunity cost.
And it's risky for me. I'm going to build my pen factory. I'm not even certain that I'm going to make a profit in the future. So when I'm making a personal decision with my personal money about whether to spend now to make more later, discounting those future benefits makes enormous sense. But what we've done as a society, what we've done as a planet, is we've let rich countries like Australia say, I'm going to do this analysis where I'm going to compare the costs to me today and the benefits to you in the future. And you know what? I'm going to discount the benefits to you when I'm doing my analysis. So cost-benefit analysis has become this very effective tool for avoiding making hard decisions that have long-run benefits, because we literally discount the benefits. And for me, if I'm deciding whether I should buy a house today or rent a house today, it makes perfect sense for me to think about the long-run costs and the long-run benefits to me. But when we're using cost-benefit analysis to make decisions about whether Australia should be building more coal mines or not, to discount the benefits to people in the South Pacific Islands of their countries not being submerged in 50 years' time, to discount those lives and costs, as a citizen I find it obscene. As an economist, it's standard practice.
When should we use cost-benefit analysis and when shouldn't we use it?
Look, I think we should always use a bit of cost-benefit analysis. Identifying all of the pros and all of the cons for a decision is a good idea. Where we have to be careful is to not confuse precision with accuracy. Where we have to be careful is to not confuse having data for something with something being important. So when it's a company making a decision about pens, or whether your decision to buy a car or rent a car or use a car hire service, cost-benefit analysis can be a very useful tool. But when societies are trying to answer big questions about complicated things that are really hard to value, like species loss, environmental safety,
human life,
well-being, people's health, we need to understand that no economist in the world has the tools to answer that question accurately and unambiguously. Don't ever confuse precision, lots of decimal places, with accuracy. That is, that it must be right. And that's one of the most powerful and dangerous things about economics, is it can be really good at making things look precise and sciencey, when in reality, unless we can all agree on the value of a human life, unless we can all agree on the value of species not going extinct, of reducing inequality, of having peace and quiet in our neighbourhoods, unless we can all agree to the decimal place on what those things are worth, then no economist using a cost-benefit analysis can answer hard questions for us. So to conclude, pros and cons, map them out, get as much info as you can, it's a good idea, but ultimately it's going to be a subjective decision whether or not we should blow up some rock art to get some more iron ore, or whether we should cause some climate change to profit from extracting coal, or whether we should build a freeway that reduces some people's travel time and destroys some people's small community. I hope you enjoyed the Australia Institute's Economics Academy. We do these things for free because we really love helping people understand economics. But if you can like, share, or subscribe to our service, that'd be great.